I should have noticed the warning signs. The way my father's eyes would narrow when I shared my business ideas. How my mother would quickly change the subject whenever I mentioned my dreams. The way my siblings would exchange knowing glances. And stifle their laughter when I talked about building something of my own. But nothing prepared me for that Sunday dinner when my father, Ronald, the man who was supposed to believe in me, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Cora, you're just wasting everyone's time with these entrepreneurial fantasies." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You'll never amount to anything in business. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remember the fork freezing halfway to my mouth, the sudden silence around our dining table, the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway suddenly sounding impossibly loud. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process that my own father had just demolished my dreams so casually between bites of pot roast. Our family dining room, with its dark oak table that had hosted countless celebrations, arguments, and ordinary meals, suddenly felt foreign. The crystal chandelier that my mother, Clara, was so proud of cast shadows that made everyone's faces look strange and unfamiliar. I looked around the table, desperately searching for an ally. My mother sat beside my father, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, her fingers nervously twisting her napkin. My younger brother, Cole, slouched in his chair, eyes fixed on his plate, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. My older sister, Alina, didn't even try to hide, her smirk as she took a deliberate sip of wine. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Dad, what are you talking about? I've been working on my business plan for months. I've done the research, Research? My father's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "What do you know about running a real business? Your sister has a master's degree in finance. Your brother is going to take over the family accounting practice. And what have you done? Half-finished courses and pipe dreams?" The irony was almost laughable. My father's precious accounting firm, the one he'd spent 30 years building, the one he was grooming Cole to inherit, was bleeding clients to online services. The family legacy he was so proud of was already outdated, but he couldn't see it. Wouldn't see it. "My e-commerce concept is viable," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "The digital marketing strategy I've developed, digital marketing." My father scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Just fancy words for wasting time online. When are you going to get serious, Cora? When are you going to stop chasing fantasies and join the real world?" My mother finally spoke, her voice soft, but no less cutting. "Honey, we just think it's time you settled into something more realistic, something stable. The position at Westlake Insurance is still open. Barbara would be happy to interview you." Barbara, my mother's college roommate. The same suggestion she'd been making for months, as if working in a cubicle processing insurance claims was the height of ambition. "I don't want to work for Barbara," I said, feeling a strange calm settling over me. "I've built something that's about to take off." My sister Alina rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. Your little online shop? Selling what? Those tacky handmade journals? That's not a business, Cora. That's a hobby." What Alina didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those tacky journals were just the beginning. They had no idea about the custom fulfillment platform I'd been developing for the past 18 months. No clue about the investors who had already expressed interest. They saw what they wanted to see: the family disappointment, the dreamer, the one who couldn't focus. "You've always been like this," my father continued, warming to his theme, seemingly energized by tearing me down. "Always head in the clouds, never finishing anything. Your mother and I have given you every opportunity, and you've squandered them all." Every opportunity? I wanted to laugh. They'd paid for Alina's business school without question. They'd funded Cole's entire education. But when I'd asked for a small loan to expand my prototype, My father had lectured me for an hour about financial responsibility before saying no. I looked around the table again, at these people who were supposed to be my support system, my safety net, my father, with his outdated ideas and rigid thinking. My mother, always the peacekeeper but never my defender. Alina, competitive and dismissive. Cole, silent and complicit. Something shifted inside me at that moment. A door closing, perhaps. Or maybe opening. "You know what?" I said, setting down. My napkin. "You're right." My father's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He hadn't expected agreement. "I won't amount to anything. Not in this house. Not with people who have never believed in me." "Cora," my mother started, her voice tinged with alarm. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, Mom. I'm being honest. For the first time in years." I stood up, surprising myself with how steady my legs felt. I'm done trying to prove myself to people who've already decided I'm a failure. My father's face darkened. "Sit down, Cora. You're being ridiculous." "No, Dad. I'm being clear." I pushed in my chair, a strange sense of calm washing over me. "I don't belong here. I never did." "Where exactly do you think you're going?" my father demanded, his voice rising. "If you walk out that door, don't expect any help from us when your little fantasy falls apart." I almost smiled. That was Ronald Walker in a nutshell. Always assuming I'd fail. Always expecting me to come crawling back. "I don't need your help." I never did. As I walked toward the front door, I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Cole had stood up. For a moment, I thought he might actually defend me, but he remained silent, trapped in the role of the obedient son. My hand was on the doorknob when my father delivered his final blow. "You're making a mistake, Cora. You'll never survive out there on your own. You're not built for success." I turned, back one last time, memorizing their faces. My father's anger, my mother's distress, Alina's contempt, Cole's conflict. "Watch me," I said quietly, and stepped out into the cool evening air. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that I already had succeeded. My little online shop had been a proof of concept that had attracted serious attention. The platform I'd built didn't just sell journals, it revolutionized how small artisans could market and distribute their products. 3 days before that fateful dinner, I'd received an offer from investors that would change everything. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, their doubts, their dismissal, all of it fell away with each step I took. What I couldn't have known then was that 3 years later, I would see them again. Not around the family dinner table, but in a bankruptcy courtroom. And by then, everything would be different. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, the weight of what had happened finally sinking in. My hands trembled as I made myself a cup of tea, spilling hot water on the counter. The tremors weren't from fear or sadness, but from a strange electric mixture of rage and liberation. I caught my reflection in the microwave door, eyes too bright, cheeks flushed, looking almost feverish. Was this what freedom felt like? This dizzying, terrifying sensation of having cut the last rope tethering me to safe harbor? My phone buzzed relentlessly. Text messages from my mother. "Please call us. Your father didn't mean it." Another. "We're worried about you." Then from Cole. "Come back, Cora. It'll blow over." None from Alina or my father. Of course. I silenced my phone and moved to the small desk wedged in the corner of my studio apartment. This cramped space, barely 500 square feet with a kitchenette, that could hardly fit one person, was a far cry from my parents' sprawling suburban home with its manicured lawn and three-car garage. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned myself, not a handout. The desk was covered with sketches, business plans, and spreadsheets, the physical manifestation of the dream my family had just stomped on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I ran my fingers over the designs for my platform, Artisan Reach. 3 days ago, I'd been ecstatic when the investment group had called. Now that victory felt hollow without the validation I'd always craved from my family. Stop it, I whispered to myself. Their approval doesn't matter anymore. But it did matter. That was the brutal truth I needed to face. For 26 years, I'd measured my worth through their eyes. Every achievement came with the silent question, would this finally be enough to make them see me? And every time, the answer had been no. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the darkened apartment. The email from Blue Ridge Ventures was still there, the offer that would change everything, $250,000 in seed funding. All I needed to do was sign the documents and send them back. My cursor hovered over the reply button. What if my father was right? What if I was chasing fantasies? What if I wasn't built for success? No, that voice in my head wasn't mine. It was his, worming its way into my thoughts just as it always had. I clicked reply and typed a simple message. I accept your offer. Attached are the signed documents. Then I hit send before I could second-guess myself. There, it was done. No going back now. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with my father's disappointed face, my mother's anxious eyes, Alina's smirk. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. But alongside the familiar anxiety was something new, determination, cold, hard, and clear as crystal. That morning, I made 2 lists. The first, what I need. It was short and practical, a proper office space, a developer to help refine the platform, a lawyer to review contracts, a small marketing budget. The second list was harder, what I need to let go of. Approval from my family. The craving for my father's praise. The hope that my mother would stand up for me. The wish that Alina would see me as an equal. The guilt over leaving Cole behind. I taped both lists to the wall above my desk. The first was a roadmap. The second was a reminder. By noon, I'd scheduled viewings for 3 office spaces. By evening, I'd put down a deposit on a small but bright corner unit in a refurbished industrial building downtown, far from my parents' upscale neighborhood and the accounting firm my father had built over 3 decades. As I stood in that empty space, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, I felt something unfamiliar. Pride untainted by the need for external validation. This was mine. I had made this happen. My phone rang. Cole. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cora? His voice was low, like he was trying not to be overheard. Are you okay? I'm fine, Cole. Better than fine, actually. Mom's really upset. Dad's, well, you know how he gets. I did know. Ronald Walker didn't get sad or reflective when things didn't go his way. He got angry, controlling. It was his default response to any perceived challenge to his authority. I'm sorry she's upset, I said, meaning it. Clara Walker had always been caught between her husband's rigid expectations and her children's needs. She'd chosen the path of least resistance, submission. But I'm not coming back. What are you going to do? The genuine concern in his voice almost broke me. Cole had always been the peacemaker, the good son who never rocked the boat. We'd been close once before he'd fully stepped into the role my father had designed for him. I'm going to build something, I said simply. Something they can't dismiss. Dad says. He hesitated. Dad says you'll come crawling back within a month. There it was. The challenge that would fuel me through the hardest days ahead. Tell Dad I said goodbye, Cole. Not see you later. Goodbye. I hung up and sat on the dusty floor of my empty office, watching the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the hardwood. The conversation had left me drained, but resolute. I would not go crawling back. I would not fail. I would not give Ronald Walker the satisfaction. That night, I unboxed my entire life in the new office, the prototype journals, the marketing materials, the laptop with the code for my platform. I ordered a desk, a chair, a small couch, and a coffee maker. This would be my home now, more than my apartment. This would be where I rebuilt myself from scratch. As I locked up for the night, I paused at the door. On a whim, I took out a black marker and wrote on the wall, "Watch me." 2 simple words. A promise to myself. A challenge to the ghosts of doubt my family had planted in my mind. A beginning. 6 days after walking out of my parents' house, I received an invitation to Sunday dinner at Alina's condo. The message was casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hey sis, doing a small thing at my place this Sunday. 6 p.m., parents coming too. You should stop by." I almost laughed. This was so typical. Pretend nothing was wrong, sweep the conflict under the rug, and go back to the dysfunctional status quo. I declined without explanation. What Alina didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already signed the papers with Blue Ridge Ventures. The first installment of funding had hit my account that morning, and I'd spent the day interviewing developers. As I scrolled through my email that evening, an industry newsletter caught my attention. There was a feature on family businesses adapting to digital transformation, and there, prominently quoted, was my father. "The fundamentals of good business don't change," Ronald Walker of Walker Accounting asserted. "These tech startups think they can reinvent the wheel, but there's no substitute for experience and relationships built over decades." I zoomed in on his photo. Confident, authoritative, the very image of the successful business patriarch. The article went on to praise his traditional approach and how Walker Accounting was weathering the digital storm while maintaining its core values. What the article didn't mention was that Walker Accounting had lost 3 major clients in the past year to online services, or that my father had refused to invest in the client portal I had designed for him 2 years ago, a system that would have streamlined their processes and likely kept those clients. "Experience and relationships," I muttered, remembering how quickly my father had dismissed my e-commerce expertise. That same night, I received a text from Cole. "You missed dinner. Dad announced Alina's promotion to partner." Of course he had. Alina had always been the golden child, following the exact path our father had laid out for her. Business school at his alma mater, entry-level position at the firm, steady progression up the ranks, all with his constant guidance and support. I pulled out my old business journals, flipping to the detailed notes I'd taken when I'd tried to convince my father to modernize Walker Accounting. Pages of research, competitor analyses, projected ROI calculations, all dismissed with a wave of his hand and a patronizing smile. "This isn't how real business works, Cora." I thought about Cole, who had never wanted to be an accountant but had been groomed for the role since childhood. My brother, with his passion for music and talent for composition, now trapped in a profession he had never chosen. And yet, in my family's eyes, he was the success story, not me. The double standard was staggering. My father had paid for Alina's $150,000 MBA without question. He'd funded Cole's accounting degree and CPA preparation. But when I'd asked for a $15,000 loan to launch my platform prototype, he'd lectured me about earning my way and understanding the value of money. I pulled up my bank account again, staring at the 6-figure deposit from Blue Ridge. $250,000. More money than my father had ever offered to invest in my dreams. Money that came from strangers who had seen the value in my ideas after just one pitch meeting. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been desperate for my family's approval, for my father to take my business ambitions seriously. Now that I finally had validation from actual investors, It felt hollow without his acknowledgement. Stop it, I told myself firmly. Their validation isn't worth chasing. The next morning, I arrived at my office early. The furniture I'd ordered had been delivered. A sleek desk, an ergonomic chair, a small conference table, and a comfortable couch for the late nights I'd knew were coming. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Paid for with my money, not my father's. My phone buzzed with a notification. My mother had tagged me in a family photo from Alina's dinner, a desperate attempt to show the world that everything was fine, that we were still a perfect family. I untagged myself, and then, after a moment's hesitation, changed my privacy settings to restrict my family's access to my social media. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt significant. I was cutting ties, one by one. That afternoon, I interviewed Mika Holden, a brilliant developer who had worked for several successful startups. She was exactly what Artisan Reach needed: experienced but innovative, with a clear understanding of my vision. Your platform could really change things for small artisans, she said, examining my prototype. The fulfillment integration is especially smart. How did you fund this initial build? I bootstrapped it, I admitted. Every penny of my savings went into this proof of concept. Impressive, she nodded. Most people would have looked for family money first. I almost laughed. Not an option in my case. Mika looked up, curious. No support system? They think I'm chasing fantasies, I said, surprised by how much the admission still stung. My father believes I'll never amount to anything in business, she raised an eyebrow. Well, his loss then. This is solid work. By the end of the interview, I'd offered her the lead developer position, and she'd accepted. As we shook hands, I felt a flicker of vindication. Someone who actually understood business saw value in my work. That evening, I received another text from Cole. Dad's asking if you've come to your senses yet. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Instead, I worked late into the night, refining the business plan with the feedback from my investors. Around midnight, curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled up Walker Accounting's website. It was exactly as it had been 2 years ago when I'd told my father it needed a complete overhaul. Outdated design, poor mobile optimization, no client portal. On a whim, I checked their Google reviews. A new 1-star review had been posted just days ago. Slow to respond and completely behind the times technologically, moving my business to a more modern firm. I felt no satisfaction reading this, only a strange sadness. My father's stubborn refusal to adapt wasn't just hurting me anymore. It was hurting the business he'd spent his life building. The business he'd chosen Alina and Cole to inherit over me, as I finally headed home to my apartment at 2 a.m., exhausted but focused. I realized something important. I wasn't just building Artisan Reach to prove my father wrong. I was building it because it was a good idea, because it could help people, because it filled a genuine need in the market. For the first time, I understood that success wouldn't be showing up at my parents' door with a big check or a magazine feature. Success would be creating something meaningful, regardless of whether they ever recognized its value. And that realization felt like finally breaking free of invisible chains. 3 weeks after walking out of my parents' home, I stood outside Walker Accounting, hesitating. The familiar 2-story brick building with its conservative signage and perfectly maintained landscaping had once represented everything I thought I should aspire to: stability, respectability, legacy. Now it felt like a monument to stagnation. Hadn't planned to come here. I'd been meeting with a potential supplier across town when my car had almost automatically taken the route I'd driven hundreds of times before. Old habits. Through the large front windows, I could see the reception area where I'd spent countless hours as a teenager, filing papers and answering phones for minimum wage, while my father insisted I was learning the business. In reality, I'd been the unpaid labor that kept his overhead costs down. I spotted Cole through the glass, talking to a client. He looked tired, his shoulders slightly hunched, his smile professional but strained. Next to him stood Alina, perfect in her tailored suit, nodding at appropriate intervals, the very image of the successful businesswoman our father had molded her to be. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Mika sending me the latest version of the Artisan Reach platform for review. In 3 weeks, we'd made more progress than I'd managed in 6 months of solo work. The investment was already paying off. As I was about to turn away, the front door opened and my father emerged, engaged in conversation with an older man in an expensive suit. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, surprise flashing across, his face before it settled into a mask of cool indifference. "Cora," he said, as if it had been hours rather than weeks since we'd last spoken. "Finally decided to stop by." The older man looked between us curiously. My father cleared his throat. "Jack, this is my youngest, Cora. Cora, this is Jack Landry, one of our oldest clients." Jack offered his hand, which I shook automatically. "Ah, another Walker joining the family business? Your father speaks highly of your siblings, but he hasn't mentioned you." I felt the familiar sting, but pushed it aside. "I'm not in the family business, Mr. Landry. I run my own company." My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Cora's got a little side project she's working on." A little side project. Not a business. Not a venture-backed startup. Not an innovative platform that had secured $250,000 in seed funding. Something inside me hardened. This was the moment, I realized. The moment I stopped seeking his approval and started demanding his respect. "Actually," I said, meeting my father's gaze directly, "I'm the founder and CEO of Artisan Reach. We've developed a platform that's revolutionizing how artisans market and distribute their products. We just closed our seed round with Blue Ridge Ventures." Jack Landry's eyebrows rose. "Blue Ridge? They're notoriously selective. Congratulations." My father's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He'd been waiting for me to fail, to come crawling back, to admit he was right. "It's still early days," I continued, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "But we're projecting significant growth over the next year." "Well," Jack said, sounding genuinely impressed, "the digital space is certainly where the future lies. My son has been pushing me to modernize our operations for years." He turned to my father. "Ronald, we should discuss that client portal you mentioned. If your competitor Grayson's can offer online access to documents and real-time updates, we may need to reconsider our options." My father's smile tightened. "Of course, Jack. We're exploring several digital solutions. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." But Jack wasn't finished. He turned back to me. "What's your website? My wife sells handcrafted jewelry. She might be interested in your platform." I handed him my business card, sleek, professional, bearing the Artisan Reach logo I'd designed myself. "We're launching the beta next month. I'd be happy to give her early access." "Wonderful." Jack pocketed the card before turning back to my father. "She's been complaining about Etsy's fees for years. This could be just what she needs." Then, with a warm smile to me, "You must get your entrepreneurial spirit from your father. He took quite a risk starting this firm 30 years ago." The irony was almost painful. My father, the risk-taker who now clung to outdated methods and scorned innovation. My father, who had built something from nothing, yet couldn't recognize or support the same drive in his daughter. "Actually," I said quietly, "I think I get it from my mother. She's always been creative about solving problems. It was a small thing, this redirection of credit, but I saw it land in my father's tightened jaw. Clara Walker had indeed been the creative problem solver in the family, though her talents had been channeled solely into supporting my father's ambitions, never her own. Well, I should let you two catch up." Jack said, misreading the tension. Ronald, shall we? My father nodded stiffly. I'll be right in, Jack. Once the older man had gone inside, my father turned to me, his voice low. What are you doing here? Cora? I was passing by, I said honestly. I didn't plan to stop. Blue Ridge Ventures, he said, as if testing the name. How much? Of course, that would be his first question. Not about the business model, not about the technology, not about the problem we were solving. Just the dollar amount. Enough, I replied. More than enough to prove you wrong. He frowned. This isn't about proving anyone wrong. This is about being responsible, growing up, facing reality. I finished for him. That's exactly what I'm doing, Dad. Just not on your terms. Through the window, I could see Cole watching us, concern etched on his face. Alina was pointedly not looking, focused intently on some paperwork. You could have talked to me before taking outside investment, my father said, a hint of what might have been heard in his voice. Family money doesn't come with the strings that venture capital does. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Family? Money? You refused to loan me $15,000 for my prototype. You told me my ideas were fantasies. You said I'd never amount to anything in business. I was trying to protect you from disappointment, he said, his tone softening slightly. This digital gold rush. Most startups fail, Cora. I didn't want to see you get hurt. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost thought that beneath his dismissal had been genuine concern. But then I remembered Alina's MBA, Cole's fully funded career path, the countless opportunities they'd been given that I'd been denied. You weren't protecting me, I said quietly. You were controlling me. There's a difference. His expression hardened again. So that's it? You're going to throw away years of family tradition to chase this internet business? I looked past him at the Walker Accounting Building, at the faded sign that had once represented everything I thought I should want. I'm not throwing anything away, Dad. I'm building something new, something mine. I straightened my shoulders. And in 3 years, when Artisan Reach is a household name, you can tell everyone you tried to stop me. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Cora, startups are risky. If this fails, the door is still open. I looked back at him one last time. No, Dad, it's not. Not anymore. Walking away from Walker Accounting that day, I felt the last chains of my father's expectations falling away. The weight I'd carried for years, the need for his approval, the desire to fit into the mold he'd created, began to lift with each step. This wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. This was about proving myself right. Most people thought Artisan Reach had been an overnight success. They saw the polished platform, the growing user base, the glowing press coverage, and assumed it had materialized out of thin air in the months following our seed funding. What they didn't see was the 2 years of late nights before that, the countless iterations, the failures, the learning. I had been building Artisan Reach long before I walked out of my parents' home, long before my father told me I'd never amount to anything. In fact, it had begun the day Ronald Walker first refused to help me. It started when my friend Raven, a talented leather worker, complained about the limitations of existing e-commerce platforms for artisans. The fees were too high, the visibility too low, and the fulfillment options non-existent for small batch creators. I spend more time packaging and shipping than I do creating, she'd told me over coffee one rainy afternoon. And these online marketplaces take such a huge cut that I can barely make a living wage. That conversation sparked something in me. I'd always had an eye for systems, for seeing the gaps in how things worked and imagining better alternatives. It was what had frustrated my father most about me, my constant questioning of the way things have always been done. That night, I'd sketched out the first rough concept for Artisan Reach. Not just an online marketplace, but a comprehensive platform that would handle marketing, sales, and fulfillment for independent artisans. A system that would let creators focus on creating. I showed the concept to my father, thinking he'd be impressed by my business acumen. Instead, he'd dismissed it with a wave of his hand. The margins would be too thin, he'd said without even looking closely at my projections. Besides, these crafty things are hobbies, not real businesses. That dismissal should have crushed me. Instead, it fueled me. I took a job at a digital marketing agency, working 40 hours a week to pay my bills while learning skills I could apply to my platform. Every evening and weekend was devoted to artisan reach, researching competitors, interviewing potential users, teaching myself enough coding to build a basic prototype. 6 months in, I had a functioning demo and a small test group of local artisans using it. I'd invested every spare dollar into development, server costs, and legal fees to protect my intellectual property. My apartment became my office, my bed often covered in notes and sketches. I ate ramen for weeks to afford the UX designer who refined my interface. I kept all of this hidden from my family, not out of shame but out of self-preservation. My father's skepticism, my mother's worried glances, Alina's dismissive comments. I couldn't bear to have my vision diminished by their lack of faith. The only person who knew was Cole, who had once found me working late at a coffee shop, surrounded by notebooks and my laptop. "What's all this?" he'd asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I'd hesitated, then decided to trust him. "It's called Artisan Reach, a platform to help small crafters market and distribute their products." I'd expected the same dismissal I'd received from our father. Instead, Cole had studied my screen with genuine interest. "This is impressive, Cora. How long have you been working on it?" "Almost a year," I'd admitted. His eyebrows had shot up. "A year? And you never said anything?" Would anyone have cared? The question had come out more bitter than I'd intended. Cole had winced. "I would have." Then more quietly, "I do." That night, he'd stayed for hours, asking thoughtful questions, offering suggestions, genuinely engaging with my vision. For a brief moment, I'd felt seen, validated. "You should show Dad," he'd said as we were leaving. "He might be impressed." I'd shaken my head. He had his chance to believe in me. I don't need his approval anymore. But that was a lie. I did need it. I craved it. And that need had nearly sabotaged everything. 2 weeks later, I'd made another attempt to get my father's support. Not emotional, but financial. I'd prepared a formal business proposal, complete with market analysis, revenue projections, and a detailed explanation of my competitive advantage. All I'd asked for was $15,000, a fraction of what he'd spent on Alina's MBA. He'd leafed through my carefully prepared documents with growing impatience before pushing them aside. "Cora," he'd said in that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, "this isn't how real business works. You need to stop chasing these digital fantasies and focus on building actual skills." I'd walked out of his office that day with my proposal tucked under my arm and a new resolve hardening in my chest. I didn't need his money. I would find another way. And I had. For the next year, I'd worked even harder. 40 hours at my day job, 40 more on Artisan Reach. I took freelance projects on the side to generate extra capital. I networked relentlessly, building connections in the startup community. I entered pitch competitions, refining my presentation skills and gaining visibility. By the time Blue Ridge Ventures expressed interest, I had a working platform with a waiting list of over 200 artisans eager to join. I had market validation, proof of concept, and a clear path to scalability. What had started as a sketch on a napkin had evolved into a sophisticated business model that addressed a genuine gap in the market. The pitch meeting with Blue Ridge had been terrifying. 5 investors around a polished conference table, asking pointed questions about user acquisition costs, fulfillment logistics, and revenue projections. I'd answered each one with confidence born not of arrogance, but of thorough preparation. When they'd called 3 days later with an offer of $250,000 in seed funding, I'd almost dropped the phone. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. People who evaluated businesses for a living thought mine was worth backing. That validation should have been enough. But deep down, a small part of me had still hoped that when my family found out, they would finally see me differently. That my father would admit he'd been wrong. Now, sitting in my new office with Mika and our small but growing team, I realized how misguided that hope had been. The worth of what I was building didn't depend on my family's recognition. It existed independently of their approval. Artisan Reach wasn't just my ticket away from my father's shadow. It was a solution to a real problem faced by thousands of creators. It was valuable not because it proved Ronald Walker wrong, but because it helped people like Raven focus on their craft while we handled the business side. As I watched Mika demonstrate the latest refinements to our fulfillment algorithm, I felt a surge of pride untainted by the need for external validation. This was mine. I had built this from nothing but an idea and stubborn determination. My phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Dad lost the Landry account today. He's on the warpath." I set the phone aside without responding. My father's business problems were no longer my concern. I had my own company to run, my own future to build, and for the first time, that future felt limitless. The first 6 months after securing funding were brutal. The excitement of the investment quickly gave way to the crushing pressure of actually delivering on my promises. The $250,000 that had once seemed like an astronomical sum now felt frighteningly finite as I watched our runway shrink with each passing week. Mika and I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. My apartment became a place I visited only to shower and occasionally sleep. Most nights I crashed on the office couch, waking up with a stiff neck and immediately diving back into work. The platform launch was delayed twice due to technical issues. An early beta tester found a critical security flaw that required a complete overhaul of our payment system. Our first attempt at a fulfillment partnership fell through at the last minute. Each setback cost us precious time and money. This is normal, I reminded myself during a particularly low moment, staring at our dwindling bank balance at 3 a.m. Every startup goes through this. But in my darkest hours, alone in the office with nothing but the hum of computers and the distant sounds of the city, my father's words would echo in my head. "You'll never amount to anything in business." What if he was right? What if I had deluded myself? What if Artisan Reach was just another failed startup, another statistic, another example of my inability to finish what I started? One rainy Tuesday, I received an email from our server provider. Our monthly bill had tripled due to increased traffic from our beta testing. I stared at the figure, doing quick mental math. At this rate, we'd run out of money 2 months sooner than projected. I called an emergency meeting with Mika and our small team. "We need to cut costs," I said, spreading our financial projections on the conference table. "We're burning through cash too quickly." "We could delay hiring the marketing person," Mika suggested, pointing to a line item in our budget. "Or we could move to a cheaper office space," added Billy, our UX designer. I shook my head. "Neither of those will be enough. We need to make a significant cut." The room fell silent as everyone realized what I was suggesting. "I'll take a pay cut," I said, finally. "In fact, I'll stop taking a salary altogether until we secure additional funding or start generating revenue." Mika frowned. "Cora, you can't work for free. You have rent, bills." "I have some savings," I lied. In truth, I'd poured every penny I had into Artisan Reach before the funding. "It's my company, my responsibility." That night, I called my landlord and negotiated an early termination of my lease. I couldn't afford both apartment rent and office rent, and the office was more important. The next day, I moved what few possessions I cared about into a storage unit and officially made the office. Sofa, my new home, I didn't tell the team. I didn't tell anyone. This was my burden to bear, my problem to solve. For 2 months, I lived like a ghost. I showered at a nearby gym, kept a small stash of clothes in my office closet, and ate whatever was cheapest. I became expert at timing my comings and goings, so no one in the building realized I was living there. The isolation was the hardest part. Having walked away from my family and now living secretly in my office, I had effectively cut myself off from any support system. There were days when the only person I spoke to was the barista at the coffee shop downstairs. One evening, as I was preparing to spend yet another night on the office couch, there was a knock at the door. Fearing it might be the building manager, I quickly hid my pillow and blanket before opening it. Cole stood in the hallway, holding a paper bag that smelled like Chinese food. "Surprise," he said with a tentative smile. "I thought you might be working late." I hadn't seen him in months. Our text exchanges had become increasingly rare as I'd immersed myself in artisan reach, and he'd taken on more responsibility at Walker. "Accounting." "Cole," I said, genuinely startled. "How did you find me?" "Your address is on your website," he said, stepping inside when I moved aside. "Nice space." I watched nervously as his eyes scanned the office, hoping he wouldn't notice the telltale signs of my living situation. The toothbrush hastily hidden behind my laptop, the small stack of clean clothes in the filing cabinet, the shower flip-flops poking out from under the desk. "What are you doing here, Cole?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He set the food on the conference table and began unpacking containers. "Can't a brother bring his workaholic sister dinner?" I hadn't had a proper meal in days. The smell of kung pao chicken made my stomach growl audibly. "Thanks," I said, grabbing a container. "But seriously, why are you here?" Cole sighed, his facade of casualness dropping away. "I'm worried about you, Cora. No one's heard from you in weeks. Your old apartment manager said you moved out. You don't answer calls." I focused on the food, avoiding his gaze. "I've been busy. The platform launch is in 3 weeks." "Too busy. To let your family know you're alive?" I looked up sharply. "My family? You mean the people who told me I'd never amount to anything? Who refused to support me? Who—" "I'm still your family," Cole interrupted quietly. "Whatever happened with Mom and Dad, with Alina, I'm still here, Cora." Something cracked inside me then. The wall I'd built to protect myself from further rejection, from the pain of not being enough. "I'm living here," I admitted, gesturing around the office. "I gave up my apartment to cut expenses. The business, it's harder than I thought it would be." I expected judgment, or worse, pity. Instead, Cole just nodded slowly. "I figured something was up when I saw the pillow under your desk." He took a bite of his food. "Is it really that bad?" "It's startup life," I said with forced lightness. "The glamorous existence they don't show in TechCrunch profiles." "Can I help?" he asked. "Unless you have an extra $100,000 lying around, not really." "I don't," he admitted. "But I do have a spare bedroom in my condo. It's yours if you want it." The offer was tempting. A real bed, hot showers whenever I wanted them, human company. But I shook my head. "I can't, Cole. If Dad or Alina found out, they wouldn't have to know," he said. "It's my place, not theirs." "It's not just that," I said after a moment. "I need to do this on my own. If I start taking help now, even from you, it feels like Dad was right?" Cole finished for me. I nodded, embarrassed by how transparent my fear was. "Cora," Cole said gently, "accepting help doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human." "Maybe," I conceded. "But not yet. Let me launch the platform first. Let me prove that this can work." Cole didn't push further, and for that, I was grateful. We spent the rest of the evening talking about safer topics: his new condo, a concert he'd attended, an article he'd read about e-commerce trends. As he was leaving, he pressed a key into my hand. For my place, just in case you need a real bed or a proper shower, no questions asked. I clutched the key, fighting back unexpected tears. Thanks, Cole. After he left, I returned to my work with renewed determination. The hardship, the sacrifice, the isolation. These weren't signs of failure but necessary steps on the path to success. Every great company had its origin story, its moment in the valley of doubt before the breakthrough. This was mine. And I would endure it, no matter how difficult it became, because the alternative, proving my father right, was unthinkable. What I didn't realize then was that my family was facing their own valley of hardship, and that our paths would soon converge in ways I could never have anticipated. Launch day arrived with little fanfare. Just me, Mika, Billy, and our 2 interns huddled around a computer at 5 a.m., bleary-eyed after an all-night coding sprint. There was no champagne, no press release, no celebration. Just 5 people watching a loading bar reach 100% as we pushed Artisan Reach live. It's up, Mika said quietly, refreshing the site. We're live. I stared at the screen, at the culmination of nearly 3 years of work. The sleek interface, the intuitive navigation, the carefully crafted copy. It looked exactly as I had envisioned it that first day when Raven had complained about existing platforms. Now we wait, I said, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Let's see if anyone signs up. We had a wait list of 200 artisans who had expressed interest during our beta testing phase. The plan was to onboard them gradually over the first week to ensure the system could handle the traffic and to address any issues that arose. I sent the first batch of invitation emails, 20 artisans who would receive early access. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I went home. Not to the office couch, but to Cole's spare bedroom, where I had finally started staying 2 nights a week after a particularly bad bout of flu had made living in the office impossible. I collapsed onto the bed without even removing my shoes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first real rest I'd had in weeks. 6 hours later, I was jolted awake by my phone ringing. It was Mika. "Cora," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "You need to get back here, now." My heart sank. "What's wrong? Is the site down?" No, it's not that," she laughed. "Just, you need to see this yourself." 30 minutes later, I rushed into the office, expecting some kind of disaster despite Mika's assurances. Instead, I found the entire team gathered around the main monitor, watching a real-time dashboard of platform activity. "What's going on?" I asked, peering over Billy's shoulder. "We've had 178 artisan signups," Mika said, pointing to the counter that was incrementally ticking upward. "Not just the ones we invited, new ones. They're coming in from everywhere." I stared at the screen in disbelief. "How? We only sent invites to 20 people from our waitlist." "Word of mouth," Billy said, grinning. "Those 20 told their friends who told their friends. It's spreading through artisan communities like wildfire. And look at this," Mika added, clicking to another screen that showed transaction data. 17 sales already. Real customers buying real products through our platform. I sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed. After months of uncertainty, of questioning whether anyone would actually use our platform, of wondering if I had deluded myself about the market need, here was tangible proof. Real artisans signing up, real customers making purchases, real commission fees flowing into our account. "The fulfillment system?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Working. Perfectly," Mika confirmed. "Orders are being processed automatically, shipping labels generated, tracking information sent to customers. It's all working." Later that afternoon, I sat alone in my office, scrolling through the comments and messages from the artisans who had joined. Their enthusiasm was palpable. Finally, someone understands what we need. The fulfillment integration is a game changer. I've been waiting for something like this for years. Made more in 3 hours on Artisan Reach than I did all last week on Etsy. I printed one particularly moving message from a single mother who created hand-painted children's furniture. She wrote about how fulfillment costs and marketplace fees had been eating all her profits, forcing her to consider giving up her art altogether. Artisan Reach might just save my small business, she concluded. Thank you for building this. I pinned that message to my office wall, a tangible reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. The next morning, I woke to an email from TechStart, a well-respected industry blog. They wanted to interview me about Artisan Reach, having heard buzz about our launch from several artisans. 2 days later, their profile went live with the headline, Artisan Reach, the platform revolutionizing how creators do business. The article was everything I could have hoped for, a thoughtful analysis of the gap we were filling in the market, quotes from satisfied users, and a brief profile of me as the founder. There was even a professional photograph they'd taken during the interview, showing me standing confidently in our office. The day the article was published, signups tripled. Our system handled the increased load without a hiccup, validating all. The late nights we'd spent optimizing the code. By the end of our first week, we had over 500 active artisans on the platform and had processed more than $30,000 in transactions. That Friday, I called an all-hands meeting. Our small team gathered in the conference room, exhausted but exhilarated by the week's success. I have an announcement, I said, looking at each of them in turn. As of today, everyone's salary is being restored to the original agreed amount. I paused, then added, plus a 10% raise. Cheers erupted around the table. These people had stuck with me through the lean times, had believed in my vision even when I had doubts. They deserved this moment of celebration. And one more thing, I continued when the noise had died down. We're closing early today. Dinner and drinks at the loft are on me. It was the first time we'd properly celebrated anything related to Artisan Reach. As I watched my team relaxing, laughing, sharing stories over craft beers and gourmet pizza, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd experienced before. This was what success looked like. Not just numbers on a screen or money in an account, but human connection, shared purpose, collective achievement. Later that night, as we were preparing to leave, Billy raised his glass in a toast. To Cora, he said, for believing in this when no one else did. The others joined in, clinking glasses and echoing the sentiment. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, tears of relief, of vindication, of pure, uncomplicated joy. On the ride home, I allowed myself to really feel the magnitude of what had happened. Artisan Reach wasn't just viable, it was thriving. We had proved the concept, validated the market need, and created something that was genuinely helping people. For the first time in my professional life, I had incontrovertible evidence that my ideas weren't just digital fantasies, as my father had called them. They were solutions to real problems, valued by real users, generating real revenue. When I reached Cole's condo, I found him awake despite the late hour, working on some papers from Walker Accounting. You're back late, he observed, glancing up from his laptop. Everything okay? I dropped onto the couch beside him, unable to contain my smile. Better than okay. Artisan Reach is a hit, Cole. We're actually doing it. He set aside his work, giving me his full attention. Tell me everything. As I recounted the week's successes, the user signups, the sales, the TechStart profile. I watched his expression shift from polite interest to genuine excitement. Cora, this is amazing, he said when I finished. You did it. You really did it. It's just the beginning, I cautioned. We still have a long way to go before we're profitable. But it's working, he finished for me. Your vision is becoming reality. I nodded, suddenly overcome by emotion. "I wish Dad could see it," I admitted in a small voice. "I wish he could understand what I've built." Cole's expression darkened slightly. "He's going through some things right now." "At the firm? What do you mean?" He hesitated. "It's not my place to say, just he's facing his own challenges." I didn't press further. Whatever issues Walker Accounting was experiencing, they weren't my concern anymore. I had my own company to focus on, my own future to build. That night, as I lay in bed in Cole's spare room, a real bed, not an office couch, I allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated pride. I had done what my father said I couldn't do. I had amounted to something in business, and this was just the beginning. 1 year after our launch, I stood in the doorway of Artisan Reach's new headquarters, watching the team settle into the space. We had outgrown our original office 3 months prior, and this converted warehouse, with its exposed brick, soaring ceilings, and abundant natural light, felt like a physical manifestation of how far we'd come. 30 employees now filled the space that had once housed just 5. Designers collaborated at sleek workstations. Developers huddled around monitors debating code. Account managers took calls with artisans, helping them optimize their storefronts and fulfillment strategies. My office, a glass-walled corner space that I had initially resisted as too ostentatious, offered a view of the entire operation. On the wall hung a framed copy of that first TechStart article, now joined by features in Forbes, Entrepreneur, and Fast Company. Beside them was the printout of that early message from the single mother artisan, a reminder of our purpose amidst the rapid growth. Mika approached, tablet in hand. "The Series A funds just cleared," she said, showing me the bank notification. $3.2 million. I nodded, still processing the reality of it. After 6 months of proving our business model, of demonstrating consistent growth and profitability, we had secured a substantial investment round led by Meridian Capital, one of the most respected venture firms in the industry. "The board meeting is set for next Thursday," Mika continued. "They want to discuss the expansion timeline and the international rollout." International rollout. Board meetings. These phrases would have seemed like fantasy a year ago when I was sleeping on an office couch and skipping meals to save money. "Thanks, Mika," I said. "Could you ask Billy to finalize the Q2 projections for the presentation?" She nodded and walked away, already coordinating with another team member about an upcoming client call. Mika was now our chief product officer, having grown into the role with the same determination she brought to her coding. I'd promoted her 6 months earlier, the first of many internal advancements as we'd scaled. I returned to my desk, where a stack of business cards sat in a sleek holder. "Cora Walker, founder and CEO," they read, the Artisan Reach logo embossed in silver foil. I ran my finger over the raised lettering, remembering a time when I couldn't afford professional printing. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. My monthly salary had been deposited, a real salary now, not the bare minimum stipend I'd paid myself during our early days. It was a fraction of what Artisan Reach was worth on paper, but it was more money than I'd ever had access to before. That afternoon, I left the office early for the first time in months. I had an appointment to see an apartment, not to rent, but to buy. A 2-bedroom loft in a converted factory building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop terrace. It was the kind of place I'd walked past countless times before, always assuming such spaces were for other people. People who had made it. The realtor was waiting for me in the lobby, all practiced smiles and calculated warmth. "Ms. Walker?" she said, extending her hand. "Wonderful to meet you. I've been following Artisan Reach's success. Very impressive." I returned her handshake, still not entirely comfortable with being recognized. The TechStart profile had led to other interviews, and my face had appeared in enough business publications that I occasionally got double takes at coffee shops. The apartment was everything the listing had promised: spacious, bright, with The character of the original industrial building preserved in its exposed beams and brick walls. As I stood by the windows, looking out at the city skyline, I tried to reconcile this moment with where I had been a year ago. The owner is motivated to sell, the realtor was saying. There's been quite a bit of interest, but given your position, I think we could make a competitive offer. Given my position. The phrase echoed in my head as I toured the rest of the space. My position as founder of a successful startup. My position as someone with financial credibility. My position as someone who mattered in the business world. By the time I left, I had made an offer on the apartment, at asking price, with proof of funds already sent to the realtor. It was an extravagance, perhaps, but also a tangible symbol of what I had accomplished. That evening, I met Cole for dinner at an upscale restaurant I would never have considered a year earlier. He was already waiting at the table when I arrived, nursing a glass of scotch with a distracted expression. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I was buying an apartment." His eyebrows shot up. "Buying? Not renting?" I nodded, unable to suppress a smile. Two-bedroom loft in the Ironworks building. I close in 30 days. "Wow," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Congratulations, Cora. That's really something." I clinked my water glass against his scotch. "Thanks for letting me crash at your place all those months. I wouldn't be here without that." He waved away my gratitude. "What are brothers for?" As the waiter brought our appetizers, I noticed Cole's distraction hadn't dissipated. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You seem off." He sighed, setting down his fork. "Dad's been asking about you. A lot, actually." I stiffened. In the year since our confrontation outside Walker Accounting, I had barely thought about my father. Occasional updates from Cole were my only connection to my family. My mother had texted on my birthday, a bland, generic message that I had acknowledged but not expanded upon. Alina and I had not communicated at all. "What about me?" I asked cautiously. "He saw the Forbes article," Cole said. "The 30 under 30 feature. Your picture was right there in the business section. He had questions." I pushed my plate away, my appetite suddenly gone. "What kind of questions?" "About Artisan Reach. About how you did it. About—" He hesitated. "Whether you'd be willing to meet with him." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Meet with him? Now that I'm successful? Now that I've proven him wrong? Now he wants to talk?" "It's not like that," Cole said, though his tone lacked conviction. "The firm is struggling. Has been for a while. I think he's trying to understand how to adapt. And suddenly I'm worth listening to?" I shook my head. "No thanks." Cole didn't push, and we finished our meal talking about safer topics. His new girlfriend, my plans for the apartment, a concert we were both interested in attending. But as we parted outside the restaurant, he placed a hand on my arm. "He's not the same, Cora," he said quietly. "Something's changed. I think he might be ready to hear you." I stepped back, disengaging from his touch. "I'm not interested in his approval anymore, Cole. I don't need it." He nodded, accepting my decision. "Fair enough. Just think about it, okay?" As I drove home that night, to Cole's spare bedroom, for one of the last times, I found myself reflecting on how fundamentally my life had changed in a year. From homelessness to homeownership. From financial precarity to financial security. From obscurity to recognition. I had everything I had once thought I wanted: success, validation, independence. My days were filled with purpose, my work respected by peers and industry experts alike. I had built something meaningful, something lasting. And yet, Cole's words lingered. "He's not the same." What did that mean? What could have changed Ronald Walker, a man whose rigidity had been his defining characteristic for as long as I had known him? As I pulled into the parking garage, my phone chimed with an email notification. A journalist requesting an interview about female founders in tech. The subject line caught my attention. From family business to forging your own path. I deleted it without responding. Some paths didn't need to be revisited, no matter how much success you found along the way. Or so I thought, until 3 months later, when a legal notice arrived that would force me to confront not just my father, but everything I thought I knew about success, failure, and the true cost of walking away. The legal notice arrived on Artisan Reach letterhead, not at my new apartment. Our receptionist placed it on my desk along with the morning mail, unaware of its significance. "Certified letter," she said cheerfully. "Looks important." I recognized the law firm's name immediately. Brennan and Howard, the same firm that had handled Walker Accounting's legal affairs for decades. My stomach tightened as I sliced open the envelope. Inside was a formal document, dense with legal terminology. I scanned it quickly, key phrases jumping out at me. Walker Accounting Services, LLC. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy Protection, Creditors Meeting, Financial Restructuring. I read it twice more, making sure I understood. Walker Accounting, my father's pride and joy, the business he had built over 30 years, the legacy he had planned to pass down to Cole and Alina, was filing for bankruptcy. And as a former employee and family member, I was being notified of the creditors' meeting scheduled for the following week. I sat back in my chair, a strange emptiness spreading through my chest. This should have felt like vindication, proof that my father's rigid adherence to outdated business practices had finally caught up with him. Instead, I felt oddly hollow. My intercom buzzed. "Your 10 o'clock is here," my assistant reminded me. "The partnership discussion with Mountain Crafters Guild." "Thanks," I replied automatically. "Give me 5 minutes." I tucked the notice into my desk drawer and took a deep breath, mentally shifting gears. Mountain Crafters represented over 300 artisans in the Pacific Northwest, exactly the kind of partnership Artisan Reach needed to continue its growth trajectory. I couldn't let family matters distract me from this opportunity. The meeting went well. The guild representatives were impressed with our platform, our fulfillment capabilities, and the commission structure we offered. By lunchtime, we had a tentative agreement that would bring hundreds of new artisans onto Artisan Reach. "Good work in there," Mika said as we walked back to my office. "You closed them beautifully." "Thanks," I replied, my mind already drifting back to the bankruptcy notice. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my distraction. "You seem a little off." I hesitated. In the 2 years since founding Artisan Reach, I had shared very little about my family situation with my team. They knew I had built the company on my own, without family support, but I had never detailed the rejection, the dismissal of my ideas, the painful break. "Family stuff," I said finally. "Nothing that affects Artisan Reach." Mika nodded, not pushing further. "Let me know if you need anything." Back in my office, I closed the door and pulled out the bankruptcy notice again. The creditors' meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the downtown courthouse. Attendance was optional for most parties, but the primary stakeholders, which would include my father, likely my mother as co-owner, and possibly Alina as a partner, would be required to appear. I had no intention of going. What purpose would it serve? To see my father humbled? To witness the collapse of everything he had built? I wasn't that petty. Or was I? The thought nagged at me throughout the afternoon, through meetings and calls and the regular rhythm of running a growing company. By evening, when most of the staff had left, I found myself searching online for information about Walker Accounting. The firm's website was still active, showing no indication of financial trouble. But a deeper search revealed concerning signs. Their social media accounts hadn't been updated in months. Their BBB rating had dropped. And a search of local business news turned up a brief item from 3 months ago. Walker Accounting downsizes, closes satellite office. I was about to close my laptop when a message from Cole appeared on my phone. I assume you got the notice? Can we talk? I stared at the text for a long moment before responding. Your place, 8 p.m. Cole opened his door. Before I could knock, his expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. Thanks for coming, he said, stepping aside to let me in. I hadn't been to his condo in the month since moving into my own apartment. It looked largely the same, except for framed photos of him with a woman I assumed was the girlfriend he'd mentioned. Raven, a name I found ironically fitting given her connection to my business origin story. How bad is it? I asked without preamble, sitting on the couch where I had spent so many nights during Artisan Reach's early days. Cole sank into the armchair across from me, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. Bad, he said simply. Really bad. The notice mentioned Chapter 11. That's reorganization, not liquidation. For now, he said. If the reorganization plan isn't approved, it could convert to Chapter 7. I nodded, understanding the implications. Chapter 7 would mean complete liquidation of assets, the end of Walker Accounting entirely. What happened, Cole? I asked. Dad always ran such a tight ship. Cole laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. That's the problem. He ran it like it was still 1990, refused to modernize, kept expensive office space when competitors were going virtual, insisted on in-person meetings when clients wanted online options. He looked at me directly. All the things you tried to tell him about 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. And Alina? I thought she was supposed to be the savior with her MBA and partner status. Alina jumped ship 6 months ago, Cole said, surprising me. Took a position with Bennett Financial. I think she saw the writing on the wall. And you? I asked more gently. He shrugged. I'm still there. For now. Someone has to help Dad through this. I felt a surge of sympathy for my brother, forever the loyal son, forever the peacemaker, trapped in a profession he had never wanted, and now going down with the proverbial ship. What does Dad say about all this? I asked, the question escaping. Before I could stop it, Cole's expression darkened. He's not handling it well. 30 years of building something, watching it crumble. He shook his head. It's broken him, Cora. I tried to imagine Ronald Walker, proud, authoritative, always certain, broken by business failure. The image wouldn't form. The creditors' meeting, I said. Are you going? Of course. Dad needs the support. He hesitated, then added quietly, Mom asked if you would come. I stiffened. Why would she want that? So I can watch Dad's humiliation? So they can be reminded that the daughter they dismissed built a successful company while theirs failed? No, Cole said, his voice steady. Because they're scared, Cora. They're about to lose everything. The business, possibly the house if things go really south. They're facing the same uncertainty you faced when you walked out that door 3 years ago. His words landed like a physical blow. I had never considered that my parents might experience the same fear, the same insecurity, the same sense of having the ground disappear beneath their feet that I had felt when I left. I'm not going, I said, standing abruptly. It's not my problem, Cole. They made that very clear when they told me I'd never amount to anything. He didn't try to stop me as I moved toward the door, but his words followed me. You know, for someone who's worked so hard to prove Dad wrong, you're acting exactly like him right now. I froze, hand on the doorknob. What's that supposed to mean? Rigid, unforgiving, unwilling to see another perspective. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. The things you resented in him. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain that this was different. But the parallel was too clear, too uncomfortable to dismiss. I'll think about it, I said finally, and left before he could say anything more. That night, in my beautiful, new apartment with its perfect view of the city, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing my father's face, not as it had been the last time we spoke, hard with disapproval, but as Cole had described it, broken. The man who had dismissed my dreams was now watching his own crumble. The business he had built, the legacy he had been so proud of, was failing, not because of any moral failing or lack of effort, but because he had been unable to adapt to a changing world. Just before dawn, I made my decision. I would attend the creditors' meeting, not to gloat, not to seek revenge, but to understand. To see for myself what happened when pride prevented evolution. What I didn't anticipate was how that decision would force me to confront not just my father's failure, but my own definitions of success, family, and forgiveness. The morning of the creditors' meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. A tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Professional. Confident. Successful. I wasn't trying to intimidate exactly, but I wanted to look like what I was, the CEO of a thriving company. As I entered the courthouse, I spotted Cole in the lobby, dressed in a worn suit that had seen better days. He did a double take when he saw me, clearly surprised that I had actually come. "You're here," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I'd think about it," I replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my sleeve. "I thought about it." Cole nodded, then lowered his voice. "Just go easy on him, okay? This is already hard enough." I bristled at the implication that I had come to make things worse. "I'm not here to pour salt in the wound, Cole." "I know," he said quickly. "It's just, he's not the same person anymore, Cora. This whole thing has changed him." Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened, and our parents stepped out. My mother saw me first, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with worry, her normally perfect hair showing streaks of gray she hadn't bothered to color. My father stood beside her, and I almost didn't recognize him. Ronald Walker had always projected an aura of confidence bordering on arrogance. He had moved through the world as though he owned it, shoulders back, chin high, gaze direct and challenging. The man before me now was diminished somehow. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his once commanding presence reduced. He had lost weight, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. But it was his eyes that shocked me most. Dull, defeated, without the sharp, judgmental glint I had grown up fearing and resenting. For a moment, no one moved. Then my mother stepped forward, arms half raised as if to embrace me before thinking better of it. "Cora," she said, her voice wavering. "You came." "I did," I said, not quite ready for a warmer greeting. My father hadn't moved, his gaze fixed somewhere near my shoulder, not meeting my eyes. "Hello, Cora," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "Dad," I acknowledged with a slight nod. An awkward silence fell over our small group, broken only when Cole cleared his throat. "We should head up. The meeting starts in 15 minutes." We rode the elevator in silence, the tension palpable. I stood in one corner, my parents in another, Cole between us like the human buffer he had always been. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, my mother hesitated. "Cora," she said quietly, "thank you for coming. It means a lot." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ask why it meant anything at all, given how thoroughly they had dismissed me 3 years earlier. But the vulnerability in her voice stopped me. This wasn't the time for old grievances. The creditors' meeting was held in a sterile conference room, not a formal courtroom as I had half expected. About 20 people were already gathered, representatives from banks, suppliers, service providers, all entities to whom Walker Accounting owed money. We took seats near the front, my father and his lawyer at the table, the rest of us in chairs behind them. I recognized the attorney, Stuart Brennan, an old family friend who had handled Walker Accounting's legal matters for decades. He looked grim as he arranged papers before him. The trustee appointed by the court called the meeting to order, explaining the purpose and process. Walker Accounting had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, seeking to reorganize its debts and continue operating rather than liquidating entirely. My father would present a reorganization plan, which the creditors would vote to accept or reject. When it was his turn to speak, my father approached the podium, his hands visibly trembling as he adjusted the microphone. I had never seen him nervous before, not during major presentations, not when meeting with important clients, not even when facing audit challenges. Ronald Walker had always been unshakable. Walker Accounting has been serving this community for over 30 years, he began, his voice stronger than I had expected. We have weathered economic downturns, industry changes, and competitive challenges. This situation is temporary. He outlined the factors that had led to the firm's financial distress: the loss of major clients to online services, the expensive long-term lease on their office space, the investments in outdated systems that had failed to deliver returns. Each point was a vindication of the warnings I had given him years earlier, warnings he had dismissed with contempt. As he continued, describing his plan to cut costs, reduce office space, and refocus on core clients, I studied the faces of the creditors. They were skeptical, some openly dismissive. They had heard similar promises from failing businesses before. One banker in particular, a sharp-featured woman with steel-gray hair, seemed especially unconvinced. When the time came for questions, she was the first to speak. "Mr. Walker," she said, her tone coolly professional, "your reorganization plan mentions digital modernization as a key component of your strategy moving forward. Yet your firm has consistently underinvested in technology. What expertise do you have to suddenly implement these changes?" My father hesitated, clearly unprepared for this direct challenge. We have consultants advising us on the necessary upgrades." "Consultants you can't afford to pay, given your current financial situation?" the banker observed. "Your projected timeline shows technological integration that would take months, if not years. Meanwhile, you're bleeding clients to more advanced competitors." I watched my father struggle to respond, to maintain the confident facade that had carried him through decades of business leadership. But it was slipping, visibly crumbling under the weight of these pointed questions. Another creditor spoke up, a vendor who supplied office equipment. "Your plan assumes you'll retain 80% of your current client base during this transition. What's the basis for that assumption, given that you've lost 30% of your clients in the past 18 months? My father looked to his lawyer for help, something I had never seen him do before. Stuart Brennan stepped in smoothly, offering statistics and assurances, but the damage was done. The creditors had sensed weakness, uncertainty, a lack of clear vision for the future. As the questioning continued, growing increasingly skeptical and occasionally hostile, I felt a strange churning in my stomach. This was the man who had told me I would never amount to anything in business, now floundering before a room full of doubtful creditors. This should have felt like sweet revenge. Instead, it felt uncomfortably familiar. The struggle to be taken seriously, to have your vision respected, to convince others to believe in your ability to execute. I had faced similar skepticism when pitching Artisan Reach to early investors. The same doubtful looks, the same pointed questions designed to expose weakness. The difference was, I had been prepared. I had known my market, understood the technology, anticipated the challenges. I had built something new, responsive to changing consumer behaviors and artisan needs. My father had clung to the past, to what had worked before, unable or unwilling to evolve. When the meeting concluded, the trustee announced that creditors would have 10 days to vote on the reorganization plan. But the verdict was already visible. On their faces. Rejection. Without a dramatically improved plan, Walker Accounting would likely be forced into Chapter 7 liquidation. As we filed out of the conference room, my father moved like a man in a trance, his face ashen. My mother took his arm, supporting him physically in a way that seemed symbolic of their relationship, her strength quietly shoring up his public image. Cole caught my eye, his expression pleading. Help, it seemed to say. But what could I possibly do? This wasn't my business, my failure, my responsibility to fix. Yet as I watched my father, diminished, defeated, facing the collapse of everything he had built, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades had inverted. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval, trying desperately to prove my worth. He was no longer the authoritative patriarch, dispensing judgment from on high. Now, I was the successful entrepreneur, the one with resources and expertise. And he was the one who had failed, who needed help, who might have to seek approval and validation from others, perhaps even from me. The realization was dizzying, uncomfortable, and strangely hollow. This wasn't how I had imagined our roles would reverse. Not like this. After the creditors' meeting, I found myself following my family to a small cafe across from the courthouse. I hadn't planned to join them, had fully intended to return to the Artisan Reach office and immerse myself in the comfortable certainty of my own success. Yet something, curiosity perhaps, or some lingering sense of connection I couldn't quite sever, led me to accept Cole's quiet invitation. Just coffee, he'd said. Half an hour. The cafe was nearly empty at mid-morning, the rush of commuters long gone. We settled at a corner table, my parents on one side, Cole and I on the other, a physical division that mirrored the emotional one. My mother ordered for everyone with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing social situations. 4 coffees, please, 1 black, 1 with cream, 2 with cream and sugar. She remembered how we all took our coffee, a small detail that struck me as oddly moving. For several minutes, no one spoke. My father stared into his black coffee as though it might offer solutions to his business problems. My mother fidgeted with her napkin, folding and refolding it with nervous precision. Cole looked between us, clearly hoping someone would break the ice. Finally, my mother spoke. Your suit is beautiful, Cora. Is it? Armani. Burberry, I replied, the absurdity of discussing fashion after what we'd just witnessed almost making me laugh. I had it tailored last month. My mother nodded, a strained smile on her face. It suits you. You look very professional. Professional. It was the highest compliment in Clara Walker's vocabulary, the quality she had always most admired in others. Once I would have glowed at this acknowledgement. Now it felt trivial, disconnected from the reality of our situation. How's your company doing? My father asked suddenly, surprising me by addressing me directly. Artisan Reach, isn't it? I studied him, trying to detect any sarcasm or bitterness in his question. There was none. Just genuine inquiry, perhaps even a hint of respect. Very well, I answered cautiously. We closed a Series A round 3 months ago, $3.2 million. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. Impressive. And your user base? Over 2,000 artisans actively selling on the platform. About 50,000 regular customers. Growth has been consistent since launch. He nodded, a gesture I recognized from countless business discussions I had witnessed growing up. The acknowledgement of solid numbers, of indisputable success. I saw the article, he said. In Forbes. The 30 under 30 feature. Dad, Cole interjected, his tone warning. Maybe this isn't the time to… No, my father interrupted, his voice firmer than it had been all day. It is the time. He looked directly at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since I had walked out of their house 3 years earlier. "You were right, Cora," he said, the words hanging in the air between us like something physical, tangible, about everything. The digital transition, the changing market, all of it. I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. In all the scenarios I had imagined for this reunion, and I had imagined many, I had never anticipated this. Ronald Walker admitting I was right. "If I had listened to you 3 years ago," he continued, his voice low but steady, "if I had implemented even half of the changes you suggested, Walker Accounting might not be facing bankruptcy today." My mother reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Ronald, you did what you thought was best." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I did what was comfortable, what was familiar. I refused to adapt because adapting meant admitting the world had changed, that my way wasn't the only way, that maybe my daughter understood something I didn't." I sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break this moment of unexpected honesty. My father, proud, stubborn Ronald Walker, was acknowledging not just his business failure, but the deeper failure of his rigid thinking. "The things I said to you," he continued, his gaze dropping briefly before meeting mine again. "About never amounting to anything in business, about wasting your time with digital fantasies. I was wrong. So wrong. The vindication I had once craved now felt hollow, overshadowed by the genuine pain in my father's eyes. This wasn't the satisfying scenario I had imagined, where he reluctantly acknowledged my success while maintaining his own superiority. This was something far more complex. A broken man confronting his own failures, his own misplaced certainty. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is it because I've succeeded? Because Artisan Reach is profitable while Walker Accounting is bankrupt? Would you be saying any of this if our situations were reversed?" Harsh questions, perhaps, but necessary ones. I needed to know if this was genuine reflection or merely the desperation of a drowning man. My father didn't flinch. "Fair questions," he acknowledged. "The bankruptcy, it forced me to face some difficult truths. About my business decisions. About my stubbornness." He paused. "About how I treated you." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table to me. "I've been following your company since the TechStart article, collecting every piece of press, every mention, reading your interviews, studying your business model." I opened the folder to find a meticulously organized collection of articles, printouts, notes in my father's precise handwriting, analysis of Artisan Reach's growth strategy, observations about our fulfillment system. It was the kind of thorough research he had always conducted on companies he admired. "You built something remarkable," he said quietly. "Something innovative and needed. You saw a gap in the market that others missed, and you created a solution. That's real business acumen, Cora." The compliment landed like a physical weight, heavy with the validation I had sought for so long, and then convinced myself I no longer needed. "And yet," I said, closing the folder, "3 years ago, you threw me out, told me I was wasting my time, that I'd never succeed." My mother flinched. Cole looked down at his coffee. My father, however, maintained eye contact. "Yes," he said simply. "I did. And I was wrong. Not just about your business sense, but about what it means to be a father. To support your children even when they choose a different path." A lump formed in my throat, unexpected emotion rising where I had thought there was only coldness. I swallowed hard. "Walker Accounting will likely be liquidated," my father continued, his voice remarkably steady given the weight of his words. 30 years of work, gone. The family legacy I wanted to build, finished. And the most painful part isn't losing the business. It's knowing that I lost my daughter long before that, for the same reason. my inability to see beyond my own narrow vision. The raw honesty of his statement hung in the air between us. I had come to this meeting expecting to feel power in my father's downfall, to experience the satisfaction of having proven him wrong. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also sadness, empathy, and a strange sense of connection I had thought severed years ago. My phone buzzed, a reminder of my 1 p.m. meeting back at Artisan Reach, a convenient escape from this increasingly emotional conversation. "I need to go," I said, gathering my purse and standing. My father nodded, resignation in his expression. He had said his piece, made his acknowledgement, without any apparent expectation of forgiveness or reconciliation. As I turned to leave, Cole caught my eye, his expression pleading. But it was my mother who spoke. "Cora," she said softly, would you consider having dinner with us sometime? Before everything changes? Before everything changes. Before Walker Accounting is liquidated. Before they potentially lose their home. Before the life they had built unravels completely." I hesitated, caught between the impulse to protect myself from further entanglement and a growing recognition of the genuine regret in my father's eyes. "I'll think about it," I said finally. The same words I had given Cole about attending the creditors' meeting, but this time, they carried a different weight, a different possibility. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt my father's gaze on my back, not judgmental or dismissive, as it once had been, but something new. Something that looked remarkably like respect. "Absolutely not," Mika said, pacing the length of my office. "You can't be serious, Cora." I leaned back in my chair, watching her reaction to what I had just proposed. 2 days had passed since the creditors meeting. 2 days of distracted work and sleepless nights as an idea had formed and solidified in my mind. "I'm completely serious," I replied. "I think it makes business sense." "Business sense?" Mika stopped pacing to stare at me incredulously. "Acquiring a failing accounting firm that still uses paper ledgers and fax machines? A firm that's hemorrhaging clients and drowning in debt? That makes business sense?" When she put it that way, it did sound absurd. But the plan forming in my mind went beyond simple acquisition. Not acquiring the firm as it exists now, I clarified. Acquiring the client relationships, the institutional knowledge, the brand recognition, and then completely transforming the business model. Mika dropped into the chair across from me, still skeptical. "Into what?" "Artisan Reach is a platform for crafters and artisans. What do we know about accounting services? We know technology. We know user experience. We know how to build platforms that connect service providers with clients." I pulled up a presentation I'd been working on since 3 a.m. What if we created a digital platform that connects small businesses with accounting professionals? Walker, accounting already has the expertise and client relationships. What they lack is the technological infrastructure. Mika studied the slides, her initial resistance giving way to professional curiosity. "So, we'd be essentially creating a new division of Artisan Reach? Artisan Reach Financial?" "Something like that." I nodded. Different branding, different target audience, but the same underlying technology philosophy, connecting providers with customers through a streamlined digital experience. She scrolled through my projections, frowning slightly. "The numbers? Look solid, but Cora, I have to ask, is this really about business opportunity or is it about your family?" The question was fair, one I had been asking myself since the idea first occurred to me. Was this a logical business move or an emotional reaction to seeing my father broken by failure? "Both," I admitted after a moment. "But that doesn't make it a bad decision. Sometimes personal insight gives us business advantages." Mika set down the tablet, studying me with the directness that had made her such a valuable partner from the beginning. You're the CEO. If you want to pursue this, I'll support you. But I need you to be clear-eyed about the challenges. This isn't just about building new technology. It's about integrating a traditional business culture with our startup mentality. It's about managing your family dynamics within a professional context. I know, I said quietly. I've thought about all of that. Have you discussed this with your father? With Cole? I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted to solidify the concept first, make sure it could work financially. Mika nodded, then asked the question I had been avoiding. And what role would your father have in this new venture? It was the crux of the matter, the most complicated aspect of my plan. Ronald Walker was both the greatest asset and the greatest liability of Walker Accounting. His expertise and client relationships were valuable, but his resistance to change had driven the business into bankruptcy. Consultant, I said finally, focusing on client relations and compliance issues, not operations, not technology, not strategy. And you think he'd accept that? Mika asked skeptically. A man who's been his own boss for 30 years, suddenly reporting to his daughter. I don't know, I admitted. But it's the only offer I'd be willing to make. Later that day, I called Cole and asked him to arrange a meeting, not at our parents' home, which carried too many difficult memories, and not at my office, where the power dynamic would be too overtly in my favor. Instead, I suggested a private, room at Meridian, a upscale restaurant downtown. Just the four of us? I specified. Mom, Dad, you and me. What's this about? Cole asked, clearly surprised by the invitation. I have a proposition, I said, unwilling to elaborate further until I had everyone together. Friday at 7 p.m. Can you make it happen? He hesitated, then agreed. I'll let them know. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. I refined my proposal, consulting with Artisan Reach's CFO and legal team to ensure the numbers worked, and the structure was sound. I prepared a detailed presentation, anticipating every possible question or objection. I rehearsed my pitch until I could deliver it flawlessly, without betraying the emotional undercurrents that threatened to complicate a business decision. By Friday evening, I was as prepared as I could possibly be. I arrived at Meridian 30 minutes early, reviewing my notes one final time as I waited in the private dining room I had reserved. The space was elegant but neutral, expensive enough to convey success, but not ostentatious enough to seem like I was flaunting my wealth. My parents arrived precisely on time, Cole trailing slightly behind them. My mother looked better than she had at the creditors' meeting. She'd colored her hair, applied makeup, made an effort with her appearance in a way that suggested she saw this dinner as important. My father, too, seemed to have recovered some of his dignity, his suit pressed, his posture straighter, though the defeated look had not entirely left his eyes. After brief, awkward greetings, we were seated, and a server took our drink orders. I opted for sparkling water, needing complete clarity for what was to come. My father, who had always enjoyed a scotch before dinner, also requested water, a small detail that didn't escape my notice. Thank you for coming, I began once the server had left. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. Of course, my mother said quickly, her smile strained but genuine. We were surprised by your invitation. My father nodded but remained silent, watching me with a new wariness that seemed born of hard lessons learned. I've been thinking about Walker Accounting's situation, I continued, deciding to get straight to the point. About the challenges you're facing and the likely outcome of the Chapter 11 filing. My father flinched slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. The vote is scheduled for next Tuesday. Based on the creditors' reactions, we're expecting to be forced into Chapter 7 liquidation. Which means you'll lose everything, I stated. Not as a question, but as the reality we all understood. The business, potentially your home if it was used as collateral, your retirement security. Cole shifted uncomfortably. Cora, we're aware of the implications. I have a proposal, I said, opening my tablet and activating the presentation. Had prepared. A way to salvage something from Walker Accounting while creating a new opportunity for growth. I outlined my vision. Not a bailout or a charity, but a business transformation. Artisan Reach would create a new division focused on connecting small businesses with accounting professionals through a digital platform. We would acquire the Walker accounting client list, brand recognition, and expertise, while completely overhauling the business model and technological infrastructure. As I spoke, I watched their reactions carefully. Cole was immediately engaged, seeing the potential with the same quickness that had always characterized his thinking. My mother looked hopeful but confused by some of the technical details. My father listened with an intensity I had never seen from him before, his expression shifting from skepticism to cautious interest as I explained the financials. The terms would be straightforward, I continued, moving to the critical slide in my presentation. Artisan Reach would pay a fair market value for Walker Accounting's assets, primarily the client relationships and intellectual property. The payment would be structured to settle the most pressing debts and provide a small cushion for your personal finances. I paused, then delivered the most difficult part of my proposal. Ronald would join the new division as a senior consultant, focusing on client relations and compliance. Cole would be offered a position as a business development manager, leveraging his accounting background and people skills. The implications were clear. They would be employees, not owners. They would work within my company structure, under my leadership, following my vision. It was a complete inversion of the dynamic that had defined our family for decades. And what would this new division be called? My father asked, his first question since I had begun my presentation. I was thinking, Walker Financial Solutions, I replied, maintaining the Walker name recognition while signaling a new direction. My father nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And my role, as consultant, I would report to the division director, I said, not softening the reality. Who would report to me? A heavy silence fell over the table. 3 years ago, my father would have dismissed such a proposal immediately, outraged at the suggestion that he work under anyone's authority, let alone his daughter's. Now, he simply absorbed the information, his face betraying complex emotions. I couldn't fully decipher. This is, my mother began, then stopped, clearly uncertain how to proceed. It's a business offer, I said, closing my tablet. Based on business realities. Walker Accounting as it exists now is not viable, but there's value there that could be leveraged in a new context. Why? My father asked finally, the single word hanging in the air between us. I could have given him the strictly business rationale, the operational synergies, the market opportunity, the potential return on investment. But honesty seemed more important in this moment. Because I see an opportunity, I said. A business opportunity, yes. But also an opportunity to create something new from what's been broken. For all of us. My father held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. I'd like to review the full proposal, the legal details, the financial terms. Of course, I agreed, relieved that he was approaching this as a business discussion rather than an emotional one. I'll have the documents sent to you tomorrow. As dinner arrived, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, though the weight of my proposal remained present in every carefully chosen word, every measured reaction. We were negotiating not just a business arrangement, but the terms of a possible reconciliation, a new relationship built on different foundations than the one that had fractured 3 years earlier. When the meal concluded, my father extended his hand to me, a formal, businesslike gesture that nonetheless carried emotional significance. Thank you for the proposal, Cora. It's thoughtful, thorough, professional. Professional. The same word my mother had used to describe my appearance at the creditors' meeting. But coming from Ronald Walker in this context, it was more than a comment on my presentation style. It was acknowledgement, respect, recognition of my business acumen, everything I had once desperately wanted from him. "I'll wait for your response," I said, shaking his hand firmly, equal to equal. As they left, Cole lingered behind. "That was not what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" I asked. "I don't know. Gloating, maybe? A declaration of independence? Not this. This is a business decision," I said, though we both knew it was more complicated than that. Cole smiled slightly. "If you say so." Then, more seriously, "He'll take the deal, Cora. He doesn't have a choice, and he knows it." As I drove home that night, I contemplated Cole's words. My father didn't have a choice, a stark reversal of our positions from 3 years ago. The power was entirely mine now. I could dictate terms, set conditions, require acknowledgments of past wrongs. But watching him across that dinner table, seeing the effort it took for him to consider working under his daughter's authority, I realized that power didn't feel as satisfying as I had once imagined it would. What I wanted wasn't submission or revenge. It was something more complex. A new relationship built on mutual respect, where both our strengths could be acknowledged without the toxic dynamics of the past. Whether that was possible remained to be seen. 5 days after our dinner at Meridian, I received a call from Cole. "Dad wants to meet," he said without preamble. "Just you and him, to discuss the proposal." I had expected this, a private negotiation between the two strongest personalities in the family. What surprised me was the location he suggested. "He wants to meet at the house," Cole continued. "In his home office. The Walker family home, the place I had walked away from 3 years earlier, vowing never to return. The site of my most painful rejection. My father's territory." "Why there?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "He says there are things you need to see," Cole replied. "Things that will affect your decision." Curiosity overwhelmed my hesitation. "When?" "Tonight, 7 o'clock. That evening, I drove the familiar route to my parents' suburban home with a strange mixture of dread and determination. The neighborhood hadn't changed. The same manicured lawns, the same stately houses, the same sense of established prosperity. But something felt different, a subtle shift I couldn't immediately identify. As I pulled into the driveway, I realized what it was. The Walker house, always impeccably maintained, showed small signs of neglect: unraked leaves beneath the maple tree, peeling paint on the porch trim, burnt-out bulbs in the landscape lighting, minor details that spoke to larger financial constraints. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, her smile tentative but genuine. "Cora, thank you for coming." I nodded, stepping into the foyer where family photos still lined the walls, including several of me that I had assumed would have been removed after my departure. The house smelled the same: my mother's favorite potpourri, the lemon polish she used on the hardwood floors, the faint hint of my father's cologne. "He's waiting for you in his office," she said, gesturing toward the hallway I knew so well. "Can I get you anything? Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you," I replied, already moving toward my father's sanctuary, the room that had been off-limits throughout my childhood except by specific invitation. The door was open, unusual for a space my father had always kept carefully controlled. He sat behind his desk, but rose when I appeared in the doorway. "Cora," he said, his voice carrying none of the authoritative tone I associated with this room. "Thank you for coming." I stepped inside, immediately noticing changes. The impressive mahogany desk, once meticulously organized with files and documents, arranged at precise angles, was now cluttered with disorganized papers. The credenza that had displayed his professional awards and certifications was half empty, several items apparently sold or packed away. "Your proposal," he began, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I've reviewed it thoroughly. The terms are fair. More than fair, actually." I sat, maintaining the professional demeanor I had decided would define our interactions going forward. "Good, then we can proceed with the necessary paperwork." "Before we do," he said, "there's something you should know. Something that might change your offer." He turned to the filing cabinet behind him, the one that had always been locked throughout my childhood, and removed a thick folder. Setting. It on the desk between us, he opened it to reveal financial statements, medical bills, and insurance documents. "I have Parkinson's disease," he said quietly. "Early stages, diagnosed about 18 months ago." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Parkinson's?" I repeated, trying to process this unexpected information. "Does Mom know? Cole?" He nodded. "Your mother knows everything. Cole knows about the diagnosis, but not all the details." He gestured to the documents. "The medical expenses have been substantial. Part of what pushed Walker Accounting into bankruptcy." I looked more closely at the papers, seeing now what he wanted me to understand. The business hadn't failed solely because of his resistance to modernization, though that had been a major factor. It had been further strained by mounting medical bills, treatments not fully covered by insurance, experimental protocols he had pursued in hopes of slowing the disease's progression. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the question encompassing both his diagnosis and the financial strain it had caused. "Would you have cared?" he countered, not harshly, but with genuine uncertainty. "After how we parted, after what I said to you." I had no immediate answer. Would I have cared? Had I known my father was facing a degenerative disease while still refusing to acknowledge my business acumen? Would it have changed anything? "The tremors will get worse," he continued matter-of-factly. "Eventually cognitive. Decline is likely, which means your offer, the consulting position, it may not be viable long-term." I studied him. The slight tremor in his left hand that I had attributed to age or stress now revealed as something more significant. The weight loss that suddenly made more sense. The careful way he moved as if constantly aware of his body's potential betrayal. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "You could have accepted the offer without disclosing your condition." "Because," he said, meeting my eyes directly, "I don't want your help if it's based on incomplete information. I don't want your pity, and I don't want to be a liability to your company." In that moment, I recognized something in my father I had never fully appreciated before. A fundamental integrity that, despite his many flaws, defined his approach to business and perhaps to life. He would not accept rescue under false pretenses, even when facing the loss of everything he had built. "This changes things," I admitted quietly. 2 weeks after learning about my father's condition, I sat alone in my office at Artisan Reach, staring at the final acquisition documents for Walker Accounting. My legal team had revised the agreement, taking into account my father's health disclosure and adjusting the terms accordingly. The new arrangement included comprehensive health coverage, accommodations for his condition as it progressed, and a more flexible consulting role that could evolve as his capabilities changed. On paper, it was perfect, compassionate yet businesslike, addressing both the professional and personal dimensions of the situation. The board had approved it unanimously. The creditors had agreed to the terms. All that remained was for my father to sign. And yet, as I reviewed the meticulously crafted agreement, I felt strangely hollow. This was what winning looked like. Having the power to rescue the very people who had dismissed me. To dictate terms to the father who had once told me I would never amount to anything. I had proven him wrong so thoroughly that I was now in position to save his legacy, to preserve what could be salvaged of the Walker name in the business community. A complete reversal of fortune. A total victory. So why did it feel so empty? Picked up the small framed photograph on my desk, the only personal item in my otherwise sleekly professional office. It showed a much younger version of myself, perhaps 12 years old, sitting beside my father at his desk, both of us laughing as I pretended to review documents with exaggerated seriousness. I had found it in my mother's photo album during my recent visit to the house, and she had insisted I take it. "You were always trying to be part of his world," she had said softly. "And he was always so proud of how quickly you understood things." Proud. Not a word I would have associated with my father's feelings toward me. And yet, looking at the photograph, I could see it clearly, the genuine delight in his expression as he shared his work with his precocious daughter. What had changed between that moment and the devastating rejection 3 years ago? Had his pride in me transformed into resentment as I grew into a woman with my own ideas, my own vision? Or had fear of obsolescence, fear of a changing world he couldn't control, fear of his own body's betrayal, gradually hardened into the rigid authoritarianism that ultimately drove me away? My phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Dad signed the papers. It's done." I should have felt triumph, satisfaction, closure. Instead, I felt a strange grief for what might have been. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than power. Struggles, a collaboration rather than a competition. A family business that evolved together rather than fractured apart. I had won, yes. But what exactly had I won? The right to employ my ailing father? The opportunity to watch him navigate the humbling transition from owner to consultant? The chance to prove, day after day, that my business vision had been right all along. Victory had never tasted so bitter. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, Mika appeared in my doorway. "Just heard the news," she said. "Congratulations on closing the deal." "Thanks," I replied, my tone evidently less enthusiastic than she expected. She studied me for a moment. "You don't seem very celebratory for someone who just acquired a company and proved her father wrong about everything." I smiled wryly. Turns out revenge is less satisfying than advertised. "Is that what this was?" she asked, perching on the edge of my desk. "Revenge? I thought it was a business decision," I said. But maybe that was just what I told myself to justify it. Mika considered this. "So what now? You're having second thoughts?" "Not about the business aspects," I clarified. "The acquisition makes sense. But the personal angle?" I trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the complicated mix of emotions I was feeling. "He'll be working here soon," Mika pointed out. "Reporting to the organization you built. Is that going to be okay?" It was the question I had been avoiding. Could I truly work with my father, day in and day out, without the dynamic becoming toxic? Could he accept my authority after a lifetime of exercising his own? Could we build something new from the ashes of both our old relationship and his failed business? "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm starting to think that this—" I gestured to the acquisition documents on my desk. "This victory over him, it's not what I really wanted." "What did you want?" I picked up the childhood photograph again, studying the genuine connection captured in that moment. Recognition, maybe. Respect. A chance to be seen for who I really am, not who he wanted me to be. "And did you get that?" Mika asked gently. I thought about my father's face at the creditors' meeting, the folder of articles he had collected about my success, his integrity in disclosing his medical condition rather than accepting help under false pretenses. "Maybe," I said slowly, "but not in the way I expected." The day my father was scheduled to begin his consulting role at Artisan Reach, I arrived at the office an hour earlier than usual. I had arranged for him to have a small but comfortable office near mine, close enough for easy collaboration, but with enough separation to maintain professional boundaries. I stood in the doorway of the space, surveying the accommodations my team had prepared. The ergonomic chair selected for its support and ease of use for someone with his condition. The computer with specialized software to account for potential tremors. The carefully organized reference materials. Everything was perfect, professional, considerate, and completely wrong. A memory surfaced, my father showing me his first office when I was just a child. "This is where I make my own rules," he had told me, pride evident in his voice. "Where I build something that's truly mine." In that moment, I understood what I needed to do. When Cole arrived with our father 30 minutes later, I met them in the lobby. My father looked nervous but determined. Dressed in a new suit that hung slightly loose on his thinner frame, he extended his hand formally as though greeting a business associate rather than his daughter. "Ronald," I said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for coming. But there's been a change of plans." His expression faltered, uncertainty replacing his professional demeanor. "Change of plans?" "Follow me," I said, leading them not to the office I had prepared but to my own private conference room. Inside, I had laid out a set of documents distinctly different from the acquisition agreement he had signed. "What's this?" Cole asked, looking confused. I took a deep breath. "A new proposal." My father approached the table cautiously, scanning. The first page. His brow furrowed as he processed what he was reading. "A partnership agreement," he said, looking up at me with genuine confusion. "Yes," I confirmed. "Not an acquisition. Not a consulting arrangement. A true partnership." I explained my revised vision, a separate but affiliated entity called Walker Digital Solutions, jointly owned by Artisan Reach and the Walker family. A structure that would preserve the Walker name and autonomy while leveraging Artisan Reach's technology and investment. "You'd still have your own company," I explained, "your own rules, your own legacy, but with the support and resources you need to make it viable." My father stared at the documents, then at me, clearly struggling to understand the dramatic shift in my approach. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this after everything?" It was the same question he had asked at our dinner meeting, but now it carried different weight, different meaning. "Because winning isn't what I thought it would be," I said honestly, "and because some things are more important than being right." Cole looked between us, his expression a mixture of hope and caution. My father picked up the partnership agreement with slightly trembling hands, studying the terms with the careful attention to detail that had made him a respected accountant for decades. "This is very generous," he said finally. "It's not charity," I clarified. "It's a business decision. But it's also an opportunity. For both of us. An opportunity to heal what had been broken. To build something new together, rather than from the ashes of the other's defeat. To create a legacy that honored both our strengths, rather than pitting them against each other." My father extended his hand, not in the formal business manner of our previous exchanges, but open, vulnerable, genuine. "Partners," he said simply. I took his hand, feeling the slight tremor that signaled his condition, but also the strength that had built a business from nothing, the determination that had defined his career, and for better or worse, shaped my own. "Partners," I agreed. 6 months after forming Walker Digital Solutions, I stood at the podium of the Regional Business Excellence Awards, accepting the Innovative Partnership of the Year honor. The audience applauded as I acknowledged the joint EAE teams from Artisan Reach and WDS who had made our success possible. In the front row sat my father, thinner than he had once been, but with clear pride in his eyes. Beside him, my mother beamed, her hand resting protectively on his. Cole was there too, having found his own niche in our new venture, not as an accountant, but as the client relations director, a role that finally utilized his natural empathy and people skills. Even Alina had come, though she maintained her position at Bennett Financial. Our relationship was still tentative, rebuilding slowly through occasional lunches and cautious conversations. This partnership represents more than just business synergy, I told the audience. It demonstrates that innovation doesn't have to discard tradition, that new approaches can honor established expertise, that sometimes the best path forward is one where different generations learn from each other. As I spoke, I caught my father's eye. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the deeper meaning behind my words. In the months since forming our partnership, we had both changed. He becoming more open to new ideas, I learning to value the wisdom that came from his decades of experience. His health continued to decline, the tremors more pronounced, the fatigue more evident. But Walker Digital Solutions had been structured to accommodate his changing capabilities, allowing him to contribute meaningfully even as his role evolved. After the ceremony, my family gathered at my apartment for a small celebration. As we shared stories and laughter, I slipped away to the balcony, needing a moment of quiet reflection. My father joined me a few minutes later, moving carefully with the cane he now used. "Quite a view," he said, gazing out at the city skyline. "Worth every penny," I replied, smiling. We stood in comfortable silence, a rare gift after years of charged words and painful absences. "You know," he said finally, "when you walked out 3 years ago, I was certain you were making a terrible mistake." "I remember," I said dryly. "But you were right," he continued. "Not just about business, about technology, but about having the courage to build something of your own." I turned to look at him, seeing not the imposing figure who had once dominated my life, but a man, flawed, human, facing his own mortality with the same determination he had once applied to building his business. "I learned that from you," I said quietly. "The courage part, anyway." He smiled, a trace of his old confidence returning. "Maybe, but you've taught me more important lessons about adaptability, about second chances." The evening breeze carried the sounds of laughter from inside, Cole telling a story, my mother's delighted response. The simple joy of family, something I had convinced myself I no longer needed. "We both won, didn't we?" I asked, suddenly understanding the true victory that had emerged from our confrontation. My father nodded, his gaze returning to the city lights. "Yes, but not in the way either of us expected." As we rejoined the others, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From rejection to success, from confrontation to collaboration, from broken family to something new and stronger. The path hadn't been what I'd imagined when I walked out of my parents' house that night, determined to prove my father wrong. I had proven him wrong, yes. But more importantly, we had both proven capable of something far more difficult than business success. Growth, forgiveness, and the wisdom to value relationship over being right. And that, I realized, was the most valuable asset of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.